Hello and welcome to another Freethinkers International conversation interview. My very special guest today is Laurie Gaylor. It's great to have you with me today, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's very auspicious for us. It's our second interview on our very new platform. And of course, last week we had Dan Barker, someone you know quite well. And that was a really enjoyable interview. But it's really great to have you here. And those that are joining us, it is also going live over at Freethinkers International, our Facebook group. Would love to have you join up with that group and also join up to our channel here and subscribe and click like and all those wonderful things so that you can follow along with the interviews that are coming up and with the ones that have happened. Annie, I love the interview that you and Dan did for the Oprah show. Was it AM Chicago back in 1984? And I think I made the joke to Dan that it was a little bit like your first date with Dan.
Wasn't a date exactly, but it was the first time that we met in person. So that was kind of a fun way to meet.
Yeah, I watched it again this morning, and a few things struck me. The clarity with how you spoke to Oprah and the audience. You were articulating a lot of ideas that a lot of people struggle articulating clearly. Can you tell us a little bit about leading up to the Oprah interview? Like what kind of happened? Calls, producers, and paint a bit of a picture for us of what the day was like.
Sure. Well, my mother and I were the co-founders of the Freedom from Religion Foundation back in the late 1970s when I was a college student, and she was a women's rights activist, and it opened both our eyes to see that what the real opposition to abortion rights and contraceptive rights was in the United States and in our state of Wisconsin, that it was religion, organized religion. And that's really why we um, founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It was what was the awakening. And I was writing about the Bible and sexism for a class at the university. And it turned into a book, Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So. Oprah Winfrey at that time was working in a People Are Talking show in Nashville, Tennessee, where she had an older male host who dominated the show. But she invited my mother and I to be on that show to talk about, is the Bible sexist? And then they conducted a viewer poll, which was a lot of fun. And you could tell even then how talented she was.
Yeah.
She used that tape in part to audition for AM Chicago, which became the Oprah Winfrey Show.
What?
So her producer called us and said, Oprah loves you. She wants to have you on a lot. And we want to talk about this new thing the Freedom from Religion Foundation is doing, which is called Christians Anonymous. It was kind of a gimmick where if you were wanting to leave the addiction of Christianity, we wanted to offer information and a hospitable place for you to land. And there was a toll-free number. And so we were on the show, but she knew that we were both raised without religion. I'm a third generation freethinker on my mother's side of the family. So
Wow.
she said, let's have some true believers on the show. And at that time, Dan Barker had just contacted me. My mother was corresponding with him to invite him to speak at our national convention. And he had just literally left the pastorship, the ministry, and was a new, what he called baby atheist. And he had a very dramatic story of having sent a letter out to some, I can't remember if it was 400 or 800 acquaintances, friends, colleagues, Christians, telling them he had left the church, and had quite a story, as I said. So she said, have some people on. We want you to suggest people who could be on the show who are now atheists, who used to be very, very religious. So we thought of Dan, and they sounded him out and flew him in from California. So that's how we happened to meet. And then there were some other people on the show. There was a former Catholic, for example. So she wanted to have a mix of non-believers who were atheists, outspoken atheists, as well as people who were formerly religious. So that was Dan's debut. And as a public atheist, he made his confession of leaving religion on, it wasn't national TV, but it was widely watched TV at
Yeah.
that time, became syndicated.
How incredible to come out of being involved as an actual pastor in a religion to then kind of contact you. And I think he was saying that it was within 9 months. All of the next minute, he's boom out in the open. And did he? Did he? He seemed to almost embrace that kind of controversy. Um, was he battered
Well,
about? Was he battered about by it after?
he was battered by some. He said it was a good way to find out who your true friends were.
Yes.
And there were, his parents were so upset, and his mother got on a bus and drove crying to see him. And, his Christian marriage was breaking up, and it was a lot going on. And this is what happens to a lot of clergy who open their eyes in the pulpit and realize they don't believe what they're preaching or what they've been indoctrinated in. And that's why he's a co-founder of the Clergy Project,
Mm,
with Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, so that there's a landing place. And they have it's over 1,000 members. I think the majority are now out of the pulpit, but there are still people caught in the pulpit.
yeah.
And, he had to change his profession, change his career. It's really hard. And
Yes.
he had a musical ministry. Well, now he writes free thought songs. He has written, I think, hundreds now of free thought songs, at least 100, for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we have music in our movement, and I think, also felt that once a preacher, always a preacher. He has something to say. He speaks his mind. And also there's that, I call it reverse penance. I think he's performed it now after how many years? Over 40 or over 30 some years. But that he was going around soul winning and promoting something that wasn't true,
Mm,
and that it's important, to speak the truth. It's important to work against the religious strictures that are kind of blinding our culture, creating a lot of problems, um, creating bigotry, fighting science, that kind of thing.
yeah.
And as what's more important? Speaking as a U.S. citizen, we don't think there's anything more important than protecting the First Amendment, which has the establishment clause that separates religion and government. It's a very
Yeah.
positive thing to do.
Yes. And on the show you highlighted that to Oprah. The two other things that struck me on the show is how intelligent and fast on her feet is Oprah. Like, I think if anyone wants to learn how to run an interview, and I need to watch it several times to get better at my craft, it's how to interview people class 101. She's
Oh,
remarkable.
yeah, she was. We knew she was an up and coming talent. I mean, I didn't know
Mm,
how far she would climb, but it doesn't surprise me. Very,
mm,
very fast on her feet. And that day she had a very heavy cold, and
really?
you wouldn't have known it. So, yeah, very funny,
Very professional, funny, smart.
but
And
very religious. She
yes.
got increasingly religious as she became more successful. And I kind of think there was, maybe that is something that she felt she had to put on to show that she was one of the most highest paid, wealthiest women and Black women in media in the United States. And somehow, if she was showed she was humble and religious, I've often wondered, because
Yeah.
when we first met her, she was such a good feminist. I mean, she's still a good feminist, but she really seemed to relish the criticism of religion that we were making. At least she
Mm.
knew that it was good TV.
She even says at the beginning, I love controversy. And today, she seems in some ways to have embraced free thinking in a sense of letting go of structural kind of religion, but it's taken her on a path to a very open, almost new age kind of spirituality in some ways. And
Well, I'd have to say I haven't followed her
yeah,
particular beliefs. I do feel she got more publicly conservative about religion
yeah,
as she became more successful.
I agree.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of guilt tripping in the Black church
right,
of Black Americans, African Americans, that you're supposed to be giving back to the church and you're being ungrateful if you turn your back on the church.
right.
But I think it's very refreshing to see the new wave of um, Black Lives Matters individuals. So many of them are openly not religious. And
Mm,
that's a whole new thing. And there have even been studies that among young African Americans, and they're all increasing in numbers in terms of those who are secular. Many of them do not attend church anymore. So that's a big change. And I think it's a
mm,
good change.
mm,
Um, we've seen that also with Hispanic Americans. You know, they usually, after the second or third generation, do break away, usually from the Catholic Church. We are seeing a just general increasing secularization of all Americans. It's not just white Americans. And in fact, the group that has the highest number of non-believers in the United States, if you look at it by race, is Asian Americans.
mm.
So I think that's fascinating.
Good friend of mine, he's African American. He's recently come out gay and atheist. And I was chatting to him about how he told his mother, because she's very conservative. And he said she was more upset about him being an atheist
We
than.
have heard that. We have heard that a lot. And we do essay competitions, and among college students, that is not an unusual thing. It is also fairly common that we have a Black Indigenous Students of Color contest. Our contests are open to everybody, but we also wanted to have one just for BIPOC students to be more encouraging to a minority within a minority. And it is not unusual to see that many of them are LGBTQ in some way, and the treatment that they have received, especially in the Black church, has tended to push them out of religion. And among those who are not LGBTQ, they hate the hate in religion. And this comes up over and over again in our student essay competitions at every level, that the church's treatment, discrimination toward LGBTQ is a huge reason why many young people today are leaving religion. Now, that's great. We also want to make sure that people who are leaving religion do have intellectual reasons. I mean, the main reason for leaving religion is because it isn't true. And of course, so often religion is used like a weapon
Mm,
as well to create great harm. Somebody says, you know, God told me to tell you that you're rotten, or you're a sinner, or you have to change your ways because you're gay,
mm,
or a woman. This is the kind of thing that really turns off young people. But we do want to also encourage critical thinking skills,
yeah,
because somebody who hasn't thought through religion might leave it for an emotional reason
yeah,
and then be vulnerable to coming back to it for the wrong reasons.
yes.
But
Or
I think most atheists are good critical thinkers.
yes, and if they aren't given those skills, that not only may they be swayed back into something, they might fall for something else.
That's
Um,
right.
one of my favorite interviews that I've seen you do was with Dan and Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience.
Oh,
And
yeah, and I've never seen that, but I do well
oh,
remember it.
really? Yeah, it's
Well, it was a very, I don't know if you could tell, it was like super crowded. We were like literally in a closet, and we were so close together, and we couldn't really look at each other. And it was a very memorable interview.
I'm really interested in the the process of critical thinking and training people in that area, because as I said, when I watched how erudite and articulate you were to quite a hostile audience on the Oprah show, you you had you presented yourself as someone that was already skilled at articulating and critical thinking, logic and rational thinking. So I want to come back to that because I want to talk about your mum and how that may have influenced you and growing up generation non-believer. Because I think I know I want my listeners and viewers to really be inspired to learn the art of critical thinking. When I watch Matt Dillahunty, I love it. He's kind of very irreverent and he gets angry and um, but I like that. That's one way of presenting critical thinking and logic and rational thinking. There's another arm to that, and the street epistemologist. There's a lot of people out there that can just Google street epistemology, and it's a more of a gentle approach. Where people are just more inquiring about what you believe and asking questions. But I want to come back to that. But as I touched on the hostile audience that not only could be seen on the Oprah show, but is present there for anyone that is speaking out about about being a non-believer. What kind of advice can you give people that may be feeling that kind of the brunt of some of those attacks against them just for simply saying, look, I've chosen not to believe, because the weight of it can be so strong that it keeps people, like you said earlier with the clergy project, it keeps people inside a religion, it keeps them inside a job, it keeps them on the pulpit, because they know that if they come out, they're going to get such pushback. So,
Well, I think everybody's circumstances are different. And when you're dealing with somebody who's very young, who might be pushed out of their family's house, lose their college education, or somebody who lives in a very small town where they run a business, or are a doctor, where if it was known that they were non-religious, they would feel that that could, lead to financial problems or could lead to bullying of their children. You have to be careful. I can't speak to every circumstance, and I don't know how bad it might get in Australia, or if you're a much more enlightened land. I do know
very
that many of
similar.
our members remain concerned about being outed. They
Yeah.
want to keep their membership in FFRF confidential. We have to promise that we put our newspaper in a plain wrapper with only our initials. They're
Mm.
worried about their mail carrier really knowing that they're an atheist. And we have to put ourselves in their shoes and assume that they have very good reasons for being concerned. But we always do say, if it is safe for you to come out of the closet, you need to do that, because you may be surprised how many other people around you feel the same way.
Mm.
We have a classic case out of Georgia from the 1980s where a couple went to an event in Alabama, the heart of the Bible Belt, where we had a chapter. And lo and behold, their next door neighbors were there too. And their jaws dropped. And they said, "We didn't know you. We thought you were a devout Christian." Each of the others thought they were devout Baptists or whatever. And they were afraid to say anything honest. They didn't cultivate a friendship because they were so sure their neighbors were religious. So you never know who's going to turn out to be a non-believer. It could be your next door neighbor that you're suspicious of, that they might be bigoted against you. So, I think that tells you a lot. I learned a lot from that anecdote, that
Mm.
it's worth speaking out if you possibly can.
Yeah.
And at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we do have an Out of the Closet campaign, and anybody around the world can participate. We put up billboards with our real members, their faces, their names, with a quote. We've done this all around the country. We haven't done it in the last year or two, but it's been, for a decade. And we couldn't do it for everybody, so we came up with a digital app. It's like a cyber digital billboard. You just go to ffrf.org/out. And in a matter of moments, you can make yourself a little cyber billboard with your own quote, your face that you upload. You get to choose your appellation. Are you an atheist, friendly neighborhood atheist, or agnostic, or humanist? And then you can use this as your Facebook or your Twitter header, or you can circulate it in social media. And we have literally tens and tens of thousands of these up on our website. And now we have another one called Unabashed Atheist, Not Afraid of Burning in Hell, that was spurred on by the commercial that Ron Reagan did for us, the son of the president, Ronald Reagan, saying he's an unabashed atheist, not afraid of burning in hell. And,
Wow.
it's the idea is to circulate. The idea is to be open and outspoken and tell people why you don't believe in religion. And I think that it's got great value educationally, because the person that opens the door for you in the grocery store, your neighbors, your children's parents, they may all be non-believers, and everybody's too afraid to say anything. And that does, we think that the best advertisement for free thought is other freethinkers.
Yes.
And most people in the United States today still have not knowingly met an atheist, and that is very disturbing. They
Wow.
obviously have met atheists and agnostics, they just didn't know it. And if they had known it, it might have greatly improved the reputation of freethinkers, because most freethinkers are really great people, law-abiding, pay their taxes, etc. And we have such a stigma over our heads, and it dispels myths to come out of the closet. And it worked for the gay rights movement. It should work for us.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I think what I was alluding to before with kind of training people with street epistemology techniques and critical thinking techniques, it just gives people a gentle art and a way to kind of answer some of the Christian apologists that seem to come on with such a heavy-handed attack of you. If you were just simply saying, look, I'm not so sure about that. I noticed, and I'm not making the Oprah interview a central theme, but it is like a little microcosm of everything that happens to the free thinker in that one little episode. Some of the hostility you met and faced in that interview, it just seems that some of the arguments that they were making against you are just so shallow and simplistic, and yet can hold someone tightly within keeping their free thinking a secret. What gives that person with a very simplistic, almost embarrassing argument and attack, what gives them so much power to someone who simply is saying, look, I just want to make up my own decisions and I'm not convinced of your claim? How can they?
Well, if you read the Bible, it says that the atheist there's no good atheist. The atheist, I'm not quoting that psalm correctly. Where's Dan when we need him? The atheist has done no good. And this is repeated in church, and people have been imbibing it and indoctrinated in it, and that it isn't what they've been taught, that it isn't what you do that makes you a good person, is what you believe.
Right.
And if you look up the word Christian in the dictionary, one of the definitions is good person, which is ridiculous. Of course, if you look up Cretan, that kind of balances it. But that's a fundamental error that is very pervasive in the United States, certainly.
Yeah, here too.
That all you have to do to prove you're good is be wear piety on your sleeves and trot out religion and then you're a good person. And so often it's a camouflage. And it is, in some ways, it shouldn't matter what somebody believes. If somebody wants to be religious, fine. If they don't, fine. But as the late physicist Steven Weinberg put it, he died this year and he was a Nobel laureate. And he made this famous statement, for religion, for people to go, for people to do good things, for good people to do good things, and I'm sorry, let me say it again. For good people will do good things, bad people will do bad things. But for good people to do bad things, that takes religion. In other words, good people might feel they have to hate. They have to hate gays. They have to picket abortion clinics and hurl invectives at unhappy pregnant women. I remember Dan, I don't know if he talked about this, but his mother, who was so religious and his parents were so religious, she lost her faith after the shock of her son, her very pious son, losing religion, and thought about it. And she said to Dan, I don't have to hate anymore. Because she was in fundamentalist evangelist circles. It was all about who were the true holier than thou types and who are the people that you should abhor.
Yeah.
And this is so true. So people, there are many good people who are religious. You're not a bad person just because you're religious. But if it depends on your level of indoctrination and how literal you take the Bible and your religion takes the Bible, and it can be a very dangerous thing because it isn't really based on reality, but it is based on a very authoritarian system where what God says is good and anything else he says is bad, and you have to follow that blindly. And that is, when religion gets in government, especially, watch out because of that.
Yes. That's why I think keeping the separation of church and state is so important. And I want to dip into how you've helped minorities in that regard, particularly with women. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you to chat a little bit about your mum and the influence she had on you. She seems to me to be an incredible individual. Can you tell me a little bit about
Yes.
her and growing up and how you kind of formed Freedom from Religion Foundation together?
Well, yes, I would love to talk about my mother, who was not just a wonderful mother, but really an extraordinary person.
Mm.
And I hope there'll be a biography of her someday. But she was a second generation freethinker, grew up on a small farm. Her mother died when she was 2. Her father was not religious. He was embarrassed when the subject of religion came up. He changed the subject. And she later thought that was a very appropriate way for someone to act about religion. So when people talk about religion and Jesus is their best friend, frankly, this is very embarrassing. Supernatural beliefs are very embarrassing. And she worked her way through college. This is the 1940s. Married, had 4 children. I'm a twin in fast succession, but always was a businesswoman and always worked. And it was the abortion rights movement that propelled her into secular activism. As I noted, she was working to decriminalize abortion in the United States. She was served on a national abortion rights board as well. And it became very clear to her and to me, following her around as a junior high school student, that the only arguments against abortion rights were religious in nature. And in fact, most of it has to do with ensoulment, conception, very Catholic point of view. People say it's the Bible is against abortion. It really isn't against abortion, but it is highly anti-woman, punitive. Thou shalt bring forth children in sorrow. Eve was framed by the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Women are property. We're sinful, horrible labels against our personhood, our sexuality, sacrifice, you name it, it happens in the Bible. And so it's that real misogynist control that's really behind the anti-abortion movement. And so it was that awakening that we realized we don't want religion to interfere with our secular laws in the United States as they are. We're supposed to be a secular country, but it looks like religion is telling the government what to do. We don't want religion in our social policy. It could have been some other uh, issue that had raised consciousness for us. It could have been an evolution fight or LGBTQ rights, but for us, it was this abortion fight. And we saw great strides about the time we founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And now here in the United States, we are on the cusp of losing Roe versus Wade. We have a dire, dire situation here. We are going the way of Poland, which used to be a beacon of abortion rights, and now it's got the worst abortion laws in the EU. We have a situation in Texas where an unconstitutional ban has basically closed the clinics there. And we have a Supreme Court that has been packed by Trump with, we have 6 Catholics, and 5 of them ultra conservative. Trump's appointed a third of the judiciary, and we are in great danger of losing abortion rights. And that was something my mother dedicated much of her life to. And in some ways, she died in 2015. I'm glad that she didn't live long enough to deal with Trump or deal with this very bad situation. However, she was a great fighter, a very quiet, gentle person, but a woman of few words, but they were really good ones, and just a great activist. And women of her generation, fought so hard for the rest of us to have reproductive rights and other rights. Now they're dying off, and now what they've worked for is under great threat. So it's never been more clear that we must not have religion or religious people deciding our laws based on their religious ideology. Very antithetical to the concept of separation between religion and government. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of big lies that we hear in this country, that we're a Christian nation or we were founded on God. All of this untrue.
No,
we don't have God in the Constitution. So my mother felt it was so important to remind the country of our secular roots and be proud of the fact that the United States was first among nations to conceive of this revolutionary idea that we don't get our sovereignty from a divinity, but from, what you hear, we the people. And that really is a revolutionary thing. And I wish we could export that idea a lot more than the United States exports McDonald's.
Yeah.
But we could franchise separation of church and state. But we do see, of course, many nations now adopting that, and an idea out of the Enlightenment.
Yes.
And so she was very, very committed secularist.
And did your father, you were saying he just didn't, if religion came, he wouldn't talk about it, but he was.
It was her, I'm sorry, it was her father.
Oh, her
She
father.
grew up in a household where her father was embarrassed about religion.
Right.
My father was not embarrassed to talk about religion, although he found it highly embarrassing as well.
Right.
He was brought up in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and he always said religion never really took. But for him, the crowning moment was when he was 12 and they dipped him. In Christian Science churches, they make you take all your clothes off and put a big robe on. You put this big robe on, and then they dip you in front of the whole congregation in a pool. And he thought this, this was, for him, that was the no more religion. And he grew up in Missouri, as he called it, Missouri, a state with a lot of racism. And he said he would see the deacons talking so high and mighty about being good people on Sundays, and then he would see what they would do the rest of the week. A lot of, he grew up in the 30s, huge amount of racism, segregation. Missouri still has a lot of, the whole United States, of course, we're in a racial reckoning, has a lot of repair to do. But he saw this racism by Christians as deeply hypocritical.
It seems to me that I was mentioning to you off air, I am involved with another platform where I speak back into a religion that I was born into, which I was fifth generation born into. And on one of the discussions there at the moment that I've been having with people is I've been chatting to, saying the name of the religion, but from the religion, they're LGBTQI plus community, but they are still in the religion. And what interests me is they're trying to justify misinterpretations of the Bible regarding that, and also I speak a fair bit to women who aren't allowed to be ordained in that religion as well, and they're trying really hard to find parts of the Bible that oh, we've just misunderstood it. Whereas to me, it seems pretty if you want to use the Bible as a source of support for um, for women or for gay community, it's just not really there. In fact, it's clearly demonstrably the opposite of that. And I said to someone yesterday, I said, well, have you considered another option, that it just might be wrong? But it's almost like they were a bit shocked by that, because we've considered that cannot be a consideration. All we consider is how can we make the Bible fit into what we think it should be saying or what it must be saying. And what are your thoughts on that, and how I could maybe chat to them a little bit more about the reality
Well,
that the Bible is against the gay community and against women?
yeah, well, the Mosaic Law says their blood shall be upon them. You know, they actually call for killing homosexuals. And, you know, I've certainly seen gays who grasp at this idea that David and Jonathan loved each other or something like that, or Jesus must have been gay, pretty feeble. I mean, they're condemned in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's not a whole lot of verbiage on them, but it's pretty violent. It's pretty awful. And certainly we have seen the same thing said, oh, the Bible elevates women. And this was a very common thing said during the rise of the feminist movement in the 19th century, when the feminist movement resurged again in my time in the 60s and 70s. You would hear people trying to make this argument that Christianity elevated women, and there's all kinds of wonderful writings that demolish this. Women have been writing against the Bible for years, and I hadn't realized when I wrote a book about the Bible being sexist. I knew about Elizabeth Cady Stanton's Woman's Bible, but there were other books, there were all kinds of other writings by women freethinkers about the harm of the Bible to women. And, you know, it's really a handbook for women's subjugation.
Mm.
Yes, in a book of that size, you can grasp at straws, you can find a few things, but the overall themes are all about women bringing sin and death into the world and being sexually evil and dirty.
Mm.
And that's, you know, we're constantly being called unclean. Mary is called unclean after giving birth to Jesus. Women are supposed to make sin atonements for giving birth, and it's more atonements if you give birth to a daughter than a son. The whole thing is so sexist. They even talk about how much women are and men are worth, and women are worth, I forget, it was half to two-thirds of what men are worth. Interestingly, we still see this in our society. Women are property. You know, if you've read the Bible, you cannot believe that it exalts women.
Yeah.
And so many believers don't know the Bible very well. They only know what they are told in church, or the more palatable passages, or some story about Ruth, of course, who's a biblical doormat, or you know, Esther, who is, you know, responsible for a lot of genocide. They're shown so-called biblical heroines, but the whole Bible is predicated on the idea that Eve brought sin into the world.
Mm.
And that was so bad that it required God to give birth to himself and be sacrificed to atone for that sin. That's the whole concept of Christianity.
Yeah.
So it is a completely patriarchal religion, and it has held women back. And when you look at tens of thousands, if not millions, of women individually hunted down and persecuted and tortured and put to death
Mm.
because the Bible has one stupid Bible verse saying, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live."
Yeah.
Look what that wrought. Look what the popes did with that,
Yeah.
and also Protestants,
Yeah.
and the suffering of so many women and some men because of this kind of ignorance.
Mm.
It's, why would you want to belong to a church that treated its people that way? And the history is so bloody. And even today, as I say, we are dealing with a huge problem in the United States that will affect so many women. If you can't control your fertility, you cannot control anything else about your life, you
Mm.
know. And so if you can't determine when or if you're going to have children, and you have to carry unwanted pregnancies to term,
Mm.
it imperils your family, your educational aspirations, your job, everything. So it is really critical to women's independence that we have the right to control our own bodies. And
Mm.
that is something that in the Bible, even though it is not actually explicitly anti-abortion, women don't control their own bodies.
Yeah.
They're
No.
second-class citizens and their property. So that really is the underpinning of so many of the problems we have here today, and the patriarchal religions uniting with the
Mm.
government. And in this case, in the United States, we've just seen a lot of judges appointed solely because, or almost solely because, they are anti-abortion and given religious litmus tests. And that's trouble for LGBTQ, trouble for individual liberties in every way.
Yeah.
My
Well,
mother said that religion is I like this quote she had, where religion is an advantage to individuals, but freedom from religion is an advantage. It's an advantage to be free from religion as an individual, but it is a necessity for government. And until we keep religion out of government, all individual liberties are imperiled.
yes. Yes. Wow. And I think, like, when I said to this person, it was a panel, I think. Yeah, a panel. When I said, 'cause they call them clobber texts. I don't know if that's an Australian term, but um, apparently there are five or six. This is regarding the gay community, the LGBT plus community. That there are six clobber texts, clobber someone over the head with,
Oh,
and so they were referring to these and taking great pains to point out how people have misunderstood those texts. That in fact they're not really opposing the LGBTQ at all. And when I said, well, what if possibly they are, and this may, there may be another option that this is actually not accurate. The look on their faces was just, um, I can't consider that. And I wanted to just refer to a great book that you've written, and I love the title as well, "Women Without Superstition: No Gods, No Masters." And I like that idea as a free thinker, promoting the education on what does that mean. I like the idea of becoming your own person, and I loved the title and the no gods, no masters, particularly the no masters. Be your own person. Think for yourself. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that book came about and
sure.
what it's about?
Yes. Women Without Superstition, No Gods, No Masters is the first anthology of women freethinkers. Came out in, I think, 96,
Because it's a
a long time ago.
a
It's a
collection of
collection. It's 50,
writings.
it's 50 individuals that were chosen with bios and photos or paintings if we had them, because it was from the 19th and 20th centuries. And actually, we have an 18th century in there, and it's all English speaking. So it's that Western tradition, more UK. I don't have an Australian woman in there, I'm sorry to say, but I also included some bios in the back of some of the people who didn't write a lot but were, free thinkers. And the reason I wrote it is the reason why so many people do write books, that it didn't exist. And
Yeah.
I wanted to read it. I wanted to know more about these people. I would hear tantalizing tidbits. But when anthologies of freethinkers were put together, they were almost all men, or maybe with two exceptions or something like that. You might see Ayn Rand quoted. You might see a woman named Annie Besant, who worked with Charles Bradlaugh in England in the 19th century, who later became a theosophist, and that was about it. And even Elizabeth Cady Stanton rarely made the cut, and she wrote so much about the harm of religion. And for Australians, if you don't know who she is, she was the first woman to call for suffrage, women's suffrage, I
Mm.
think, in the world,
Yeah.
and was the power behind the first Women's Rights Convention
Yeah.
in 1848. I wanted to know more about them, so that's how that happened. But the title, Women Without Superstition, was a compliment that the great US agnostic Robert Ingersoll, who was the America's version of Charles Bradlaugh, the most famous infidel in the 19th century, but he was an attorney and very well regarded, friend of four presidents. He was originally religious, and at the time he first met his wife, Eva, she was the atheist or the agnostic, and he later left religion, but he praised her as a woman without superstition. I loved that title, so I took that, Women Without Superstition, and the subtitle, No Gods, No Masters, was the slogan that Margaret Sanger used on the banner of her newsletter, The Woman Rebel, which was a short-lived publication to promote birth control before the Comstock Act in the United States went after, and she had to leave the country. She got that idea from the anarchists, who had a slogan called No God, No Master. She's the one who put the plural on it, no gods, no masters, which I love. And so that's the story behind the title. And I'm anxious to put a second anthology together. I'm working with a lovely young woman, Barbara Alvarez, to co-edit an upcoming book from women of the 21st century, largely because there has been an explosion in writings on free thought by men and women, or non-binary in some cases. And there's so many young women and such a diversity of good free thought atheist writers and thinkers out there. So we're working on a second updated version,
I
but
think that would
the
be
one I
very,
did was more historic.
I think that would be very timely to have
Yes.
something released soon. I started a bit late in life. I've got two little daughters,
Hmm.
7 and 8, and
Oh,
my 8-year old is turning 9 tomorrow. And we were watching a program just a couple of nights ago on, I've just gone blank, the lady you just mentioned.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Yes, yes. There's a really good little program on YouTube. I think we found it, and it's kind of aimed at kids to instruct
Hmm.
them and teach them about uh, women and through the ages and the things they've done to support women's rights and whatnot. And it's done really well. They loved it. My girls just really loved it.
Well, they're little girls without superstition then.
Yes, and that was going to be my next question. So it kind of segues nicely into it. Um, at Freedom from Religion Foundation or elsewhere, are there places you could point um, people to that are educational on this topic for kids?
Well, Places, maybe not so much, but there are books out there.
Yeah,
My
books and sites.
m-
I mean,
yes, my great good friend Dan Barker, who I'm married to,
yes,
has written, and we just revised a book called Just Pretend, a free thought book for children, and it's beautifully illustrated. And we saw that online at our shop. I don't know how easy it is.
just writing these
You have to
down.
make a special inquiry if you don't live in the United States in terms of the postage. We
Yes.
also sell some books that are written by some little girls or young girls themselves, a family of humanists who have done a whole series now that are about science and also being a humanist. One's called Elle the Humanist. The others, I'm forgetting the name of them, but they're really cute. We have them up on our website. They're also sold other places. There's even a board game now about it. And it started because this little girl was from an atheist family and lived in Utah, which is very Mormon, and was so really bullied in her class that they had to pull her out and they basically had to take her to another community. And then they eventually moved to California. But it was extremely traumatic because these little Mormon kids were being indoctrinated to
Mm.
evangelize fellow students. And when they caught that she was not religious, they just wouldn't let go. And they kept talking about the Book of Mormon. And so this little girl said, I want to write the Book of Truth. But it eventually became, they changed the title. But it was a little girl and learning about learning about the universe, the real beginning of things. And then she goes on to learn about evolution
Mm.
and star. Um, she was inspired by the Carl Sagan quote that we're all children of the stars,
Yeah, I like.
star stuff,
Yeah.
stardust. So
Yes.
it's quite a story. We gave her an award, and anyway, so there's books like that out for grade school. In
Yes.
terms of middle school, I'm not quite sure what to offer. There are some graphic novels that we've had on our site about persecution of martyrs,
Yes.
that go into different, mostly Western culture, talk about Spinoza, talk about
Mm.
Servetus. Um, but I think by middle school, an awful lot of kids are reading full-fledged adult books anyway.
Mm. I I'm having the little girls. I'm very keen to find material like that. So I might.
I'll send you an email
Oh, that
with
would be
some of these
great.
titles.
That would be
So
fantastic, and I'll share them on our wall as well on Freethinkers
great.
International. I think it's an important thing that's sometimes overlooked in the discussion is how important it is for the young minds to be exposed to this, because even in community there's an amazingly high amount of the more religious material that just comes kind of through the media,
Oh,
and
yeah.
my girls pick up things, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, boy, where did you get that from? I've been trying to.
It pervades
Yeah,
society.
yeah.
We're kind of all growing up in this religion-drenched society, and it's pretty hard to shield your kids from it. And
Yeah.
I know happened to me, that my family's lack of belief became something that was greatly noted in our grade school.
Mm,
And luckily, I wasn't persecuted. I was a curiosity, however,
interesting.
and I was considered a good girl and a good student. So the main question would be, well, I can't believe you don't believe in a God. You seem like a good person. I was getting that stereotype
Yeah, and
when
that's
I
the.
was in fourth and fifth grade. And this is still the main bugaboo or
Yeah.
myth that I think freethinkers, atheists have to contend with, probably internationally. This
Yes.
silly notion that all of our morals must come, we can't figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah.
All of our morals and good thinking must come from some deity who,
Mm,
if you read the Bible, is a fiend. Doesn't make a lot
mm,
of sense.
mm.
And it's really, people are very brainwashed, and But again, that's a good reason why if you come out of the closet as a non-believer, you
Mm.
can lead by example. It does create some good cognitive dissonance in
Yes.
religious people to see that you're not some kind of maniac going out. How many times do you hear, well, if I didn't believe in a God, I would go out raping and killing? Well,
Mm.
you have to look at those people and say, what? Why would
Mm.
that be what you would even consider
Mm.
doing? I mean, this idea that you could only be good if you're rewarded someday with no proof in heaven, or, that you're going to burn forever if you do something bad. Clearly, this doesn't work. Our prisons are full of
Yeah.
religious people,
It
all
it's
kinds of religious wars. And,
it's so
we have to rely on our own moral compass.
it's so irrational. Um, and I even, when I publicly left my religion that I was speaking of earlier, um, just doing that, people instantly start. We have a term you probably have as well, playing the player, not the ball. Um, as in, instead of kicking or attacking the issue, the ball, they attack the player.
Well,
And
that's, yeah, ad hominem
yeah,
reasoning.
exactly. And
Well,
so,
it's effective.
yeah, I've been told, oh, he just has an axe to grind, or he's a tool of Satan, or, oh, yeah, we always knew he was bitter. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
all the goodness of me is being, oh, no, he must have been. So, in a way, they're not even going, oh, he's a good guy, so maybe he's got a point. They're going, oh, I thought he was a good guy. Now I realize he's
Mhm.
not.
Well,
So,
again, this idea that you're only good if you believe the same as somebody else, in some unproven philosophy. This is a very um, destructive. There's a
presented
new
to
book
you.
out also by Steven Pinker, who's
Oh, yeah.
a prominent Harvard
Yeah.
psychologist and many bestsellers, How the Mind Works, Blank Slate. But he's also written this book called Enlightenment Now. How I'm going to muff the subtitle, but it's how um, reason, progress, humanism, and science has improved the world.
Mm.
And now he's followed that up with a new book that's just come out in September called Rationality,
Oh,
about how to, why is rationality scarce, and how to think rationally.
oh, great.
And that, yeah, it's a very good book.
Yeah.
And it's talked about all these different ways that people get irrational arguments that suck people in,
Yes.
including how ad hominem arguments are used,
Yes.
to go after somebody when they can't think of a good reason.
I just want to give a quick plug for that book, which is still available online. That's the Women Without Superstition one. Not sure, you probably can't. Let's see it. I'll post a link later to that book. So this is not the lightest of questions to end it on, but I think it's an important one because it talks to abuse of young kids. You wrote a book, Betrayal of Trust: Clergy Abuse of Children. And again, I have a huge interest in kids, as I said, having two little girls of my own. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe a condensed version? And I'd love to have you back if you were open to it. And this, because this is a topic I'd love to explore a little more down the track if you're open to it. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I became editor of our newspaper, Free Thought Today, in 1985. We founded the group in 76, but eventually we got a newspaper and I joined the staff in 85. And I started realizing that I was always getting sent clippings. This is pre-internet. And I started realizing that I would get these clippings: priest rapes child 14, and I would think awful, but I didn't know what to do with it. I would throw it away. And then I suddenly thought, I'm getting so many of these. And I started to put them in a drawer. I wanted to see how many came in a month. I had this huge drawer full. So I started a column called Black Collar Crimes. And then I became aware of the pattern of collusion and cover up and musical chairs that the Catholic Church and other churches were engaged in, and became so concerned about it that I wrote, it was a very short book, but it was the first nonfiction book, as far as I know, that has been published about clergy abuse of children. And that's what it's called. It's online at our website now. Of course, it's long out of print, out of date, but came out in '88. And I was on the cusp of this. There's so many good books now, investigative books and articles, and there's been waves and waves. Finally, we seem to have come to an understanding that this wasn't just a one-time wave that we were getting, that this is a institutional cover-up by the Catholic Church and by many other churches. So we still have that black collar crimes column in our newspaper, Free Thought Today. It is the fact that the clergy are not policed. They do not police themselves. They're held, again, above the law. And if you want to be abusive, whether of children or financially, it's a very good to enter into the clergy profession because it gives you sanctity and a great camouflage.
Wow.
Not to say that most of them are doing this, but it is a place where you can pray, not just pray, P-R-E-Y.
Yes.
And P-R-A-Y.
Boy. Yeah, well, look, I'd love to explore that conversation a little more with you. I'd love to have you back, Annie. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. We've had a lot of people watching, which is really exciting as we build Freethinkers International. And it's been wonderful having you and Dan as my first two guests. It's just been a pleasure to meet you and have you on the show.
Very nice. Very nice to meet you, and congratulations on all of this, Freethinkers International. We are honored to be your first two guests.
Well, thank you so much. And until next time, farewell, and we'll see you soon. Looking back.